Great. All right, guys, we'll start the meeting. Good to see you. And today we'll be discussing a very important topic, which is the EU roadmap to phase out animal testing. We call it From Ambition to Action. And today's session marks a significant recent development because the European Commission launched an EU roadmap to phase out animal testing. It was adopted the 1st of June this year in response to the European Citizens Initiative, Safe, Cruelty-Free Cosmetics, Commit to a Europe without animal testing. This action was supported by the European Parliament, building on the work and engagement of this group. This includes the 2021 resolution on plans and actions to accelerate the transition to innovation without the use of animals in research, regulatory testing and education, which follows the Intergroup's effort to place the issue higher on the parliamentary agenda. The EU roadmap is a key step towards an EU approach to scientific testing and safety assessment. It builds on years of scientific progress in non-animal methods, as well as sustained engagement from citizens, researchers, industry, stakeholders, and policymakers. At present, animal testing remains a substantial part of laboratory animal use across the EU and globally. However, the EU roadmap signals a clear political and scientific direction of travel towards a future where animal-free methods can progressively replace animal-based approaches across regulatory frameworks. This roadmap sets out a cross-sectoral approach covering multiple legislative domains, including chemicals, pesticides, pharmaceuticals, and food safety, with a series of actions and recommendations designed to accelerate the development and uptake of non-animal methods. As this is the first time the EU roadmap is officially presented to the Parliament, we will focus on today's exchange around the key features of this very much awaited EU-level communication. And we will be discussing afterwards on how it is expected to be translated into practical implementation. We will explore the scope and ambition of the roadmap, identify early priorities for delivery, and consider the role of the European Parliament in actively supporting and scrutinizing its implementation. The exchange of views will focus on three key questions today. First, how to assess the ambition and structure of the Commission's roadmap, including its governance and planned actions. Secondly, where implementation can realistically progress first and what challenges may arise. And then, where does the EU roadmap fit in present global conversations around the phase out of animal testing? And actually, as a fourth point, we will also be discussing how the European Parliament can monitor and support and help maintain political momentum for the transition towards non-animal testing methods. I look forward to this discussion. And before we will proceed with the discussion, we have a couple of announcements. First one, as you may have noticed, and I also sent out a mail on this Tuesday, there was the publication of the EU livestock strategy. I think this is a very important strategy from our point of view, for this group's point of view, and hopefully for the whole Parliament. The livestock strategy has some very important initiatives, which includes the phasing out of cages for laying hens, a proposal that will be presented this year, according to the strategy. Also, a phase out of the systematic culling of male chicks. And that will also be presented as a proposal, legislative proposal. This year it's announced in the strategy. And next year it will be followed up in the second quarter of next year with a proposal to phase out cages for sows, pig stalls. sows. And so I think this is really something we need to support. And I think it would be a big step for animal welfare if we could get this through. So I hope that we can work together across political groups to move these proposals forward. It is a big step from the European Commission that they are now proposing this, and it will land on our table soon. So I think we will talk more about that in the coming time. I know we'll talk more about that. Then the second announcement is not an announcement from me, but we have agreed to briefly give the floor to Claire Dullier, campaign officer at One Voice, a French animal welfare organization working to defend animals and advocate for stronger protection measures, including in the field of animal experimentation. So that's why it's relevant that you're here today, Claire. You will present One Voice's concerns regarding CNRS project in Rousset, France, involving the acquisition and use of primates for animal research. So Claire, I will give you the floor. It's a brief intervention on 3 minutes, it says in my notes. So, but please, you have the floor.
Firstly, thank you for inviting us. So as you said, we are here to alert you about the project of extension of primates breeding site in Rousset, southern France, for laboratories. It's raising serious questions and concerns about the European phase-out animal testing goals. First, a questionable purpose. The extension will only furnish 35% of the French needs. Hundreds of primates will still be imported from Mauritius or Asia. We know by our undercover investigation in 2023 and with our local partner now that wild capture are still widely done. With massive importation and wildlife trafficking, the risk of viruses from primates is real. Increasing a pool in Europe might increase the risk to humans too. Secondly, a questionable timing. This activity and financial support runs completely counter to the policy aiming the phase-out animal experimentation in the directive and in the new European roadmaps. The policy is to move away from the animal testing, not to make easier to happen. Expanding primates breeding and availability within the EU will only make it harder to phase out experiments with primates regardless of the availability of alternatives, especially if local jobs are at stake. And thirdly, a questionable funding. 30 million euros of public fundings coming from a plan named France 2030 supposedly aim to catch up the industrial sector, innovative technologies, or support the green transition is highly concerning, because this could also mean that other parts of European Commissions may be indirectly funding works in this running counter to the roadmap and citizen wishes. At a time where many countries are investing in the development of alternative methods, France is moving in the opposite direction.
And finally, we call your attention of a questionable lack of transparency. This opacity has been criticized by the National Commission for Public Debate in France. And in addition, the CNRS Own Ethics Committee has raised a number of scientific concerns and questions which have still not been addressed. In conclusion, we are strongly alert you about the political risk to the European Union ongoing works, the ethical impacts, the research and science impacts, and the sanitary and environmental risks, especially zoonosis, I think. And we finally call your attention on major questions. Instead of developing a project such as shouldn't the leading state for animal experimentation also become the main contributor to the development of alternative methods?
Thank you.
Thank you for your attention.
Thank you for informing us on this situation. We will take note of that. Great. I will just let you know that today's meeting is streamed on YouTube as usual, and there's no interpretation, unfortunately. We'll record the meeting, and it will be on the website of the Intergroup, so that you know. Jessica, you've asked for the floor.
Yes, Joe, very briefly, thank you, Chair. I just wanted to comment on what you mentioned on the livestock strategy, and I think this is huge. And I think as an intergroup on animal welfare, we can celebrate this success. Of course, we always want more, but these are very important steps that we should take. It will not only benefit hugely animal welfare, but it will also harmonize animal welfare status within Europe, will improve or will decrease the differences on the internal market. I think that's very good. Just to give you one small example how this is also a personal victory for me. I invited Commissioner Verheugen to the Netherlands earlier this year, where I took him to a site where in-oven sexing takes place. Because before he went on this visit, he was definitely not convinced that technology was ready to start phasing out the killing of one-day-old male chicks. So I took him to the Netherlands. I showed him, listen, Commissioner, we are ready. We can do this. And after that visit, he came back to me. He said, Jessica, I'm on board. We're going to do this. So this is, I think, also for me, a very, very nice personal success that this is now part of the livestock strategy. And that makes it our animal welfare intergroup success as well. So thank you very much, everybody that contributed.
Thank you, Jessica. That's really great. I agree with you. These are huge steps, very important steps. We want more. That's no secret, but I think we should really do whatever we can to get these proposals through. It will make a difference. And thank you also for pushing in this direction towards the Commissioner when it comes to the new technologies that we can use. That's very important, and I have also, and we have also spoken to the Commissioner several times, many times on the phasing out of the cages for hens and pigs, and I'm also glad that he has taken that on board. So let's try to work together to see if we can get this through. It's really important. And we will, by the way, have Christoph Hansen in the September meeting, the Agricultural Commissioner, to discuss the livestock strategy here with us in the September intergroup meeting. So it will also be a good occasion to discuss these issues. Good. I will now move on with to the first presentation. So we have two sort of chapters in these presentations. First, we'll have the European Commission, and then we have a perspective from the animal welfare organizations. But from the European Commission, we're joined by Georg Streck, policy officer in the REACH unit of DG GROW, and he will present the EU roadmap to phase out animal testing, outline its key elements, and explain the Commission's thinking on implementation priorities and governance. So, Mr. Streck, you have the floor. We're very pleased that you're with us, and you have 10 minutes, please.
Yeah, many thanks for the invitation. Also, many thanks for the introduction. Let me just share my slides with you. And I hope that you can see the slides now.
We can see them. The video of you is quite blurry, but the slides work fine. And now we see the slides.
Great. So then let me start. The roadmap towards phasing out animal testing for chemical safety assessments was adopted on the 1st of June. Well, you will know that there are two documents. One is the Commission communication and the other one is the staff working document. You see here the numbers of the two documents. If you have not yet downloaded them, then you will easily find them. So two parts. The Commission communication is, as usual, a policy document with limited space, while we use then the staff working document to go a little bit more into the details, especially the more scientific content, how to phase out animal testing. As said, the communication contains more the policy level actions. We have 22 policy actions which are structured in 3 pillars, with the first pillar making change happen, the second pillar keeping Europe at the forefront of research and innovation, and then the third pillar working together in Europe and beyond. And one of the first action points is then linking to the staff working document. The first action point is divided into more than 30 sub-actions or recommendations, which are further explained in the staff working document. As said, this is the more scientific content, where we hazard property by hazard property, endpoint by endpoint, animal test by animal test, then discuss the necessary steps to phase out animal testing in this area. So in the next slides, I will briefly highlight the 3 pillars and the actions in the 3 pillars, at least on a high level. And I then intend to point out some of the more important actions or actions where we already started with the implementation. Pillar change is making change happen. It contains 11 actions. You see a subset of those actions depicted here. And let me maybe point out the action identifying regulatory needs, validation, qualification, and standardization. Actually, under this subheading, there's more than one action. So we have heard several times during the development of the roadmap that one of the obstacles to efficiently move towards animal-free chemical safety assessments is that while we have on one hand a lot of methods, the methods do not necessarily cover the regulatory needs, the needs of the regulators. So what we will introduce is a 3-step mechanisms to systematically identify key areas of regulatory needs for alternative approaches, for non-animal approaches. This will start by the beginning of next year. So by the end of this year, we would like to have the process further defined and discussed with the agencies and member states. And then beginning of next year, we will start to collect the regulatory needs from the regulators, also involving stakeholders in the process. Similar important in this context of identifying regulatory needs, validation, qualification, and standardization is to work further on the validation and standardization, streamline the procedures, and especially to have funding for validation and standardization. We also have heard multiple times from regulators, but also from stakeholders, that validation and standardization is enormously important, also to use non-animal approaches on the global level. So that is why we believe that funding is a very important topic. We have identified certain funding options already in the roadmap, and we will continue identifying funding options, and also will come out next year with a report on further funding options. Then one action point is on regulatory exploration spaces and safe spaces. With safe spaces, we mean platforms that allow applicants or registrants to share data confidentially with regulators before they actually submit data. So that would be a safe space where an applicant or registrant can discuss with the regulator, I want to submit non-animal approaches for this and that endpoint. And upfront, they get some indication from the regulator whether the approach could work. So that then the whole submission process is much more efficient and streamlined. We also have heard here from stakeholders, from industry, NGOs, but also from the regulators, that this is a quite important point. We had already immediately after the adoption of the roadmap as one of the action points which we promised, a workshop on safe spaces, with the contributions from the European Medicines Agency, EFSA, and ECHA, and stakeholders. This workshop provided already quite some input, which will guide our further work on the safe spaces. Briefly on Pillar 2, research and innovation. I will not go here into details. There, under this pillar, we have several research actions mentioned, calls which are open or which will be open. We also have quite some discussion about making use of artificial intelligence for chemical safety assessment and for implementing the roadmap. So pillar 3, working together in Europe and beyond. Here I would like to highlight the actions related to the organizational structures. These are especially the action points 15 and 16. With the action point 15, we say that we will set up a roadmap steering team that will support the roadmap implementation. And action point 16 is on collaborative structures at the agencies. The roadmap steering team will have the task to oversee and coordinate the implementation of the roadmap. It will also facilitate the exchange and coordination with other initiatives. Well, there are many initiatives out there, research projects, the European Partnership for Alternatives to Animal Approaches, etc., which are working on phasing out animal testing. We feel that one of the main points of the roadmap steering team should be to connect all these different initiatives. We will involve stakeholders in the roadmap steering team. We are currently working on going through the administrative steps to set it up. And after that, the call for stakeholder participation will follow. And we hope that by end of September, we have then selected the stakeholders and the roadmap steering team can start to work. On the EU agency collaborative structures, partially in some of the agencies, for instance, the European Medicines Agency, we have already organizational structures that support the implementation of the roadmap. ECHA recently has had the first meeting of a new collaborative platform on alternatives to animal testing, CPAT. All these organizational structures at the agencies, again, will support the implementation of the roadmap and will help, especially that we have a good exchange with the member state authorities. And stakeholders are, again, also involved. And with these organizational structures, we believe that we have good tools at hand to implement the roadmap, that we can make use of all the initiatives out there, that we have the member state authorities on board. We know that the implementation will have to be a collaborative effort, and that exchange and coordination is key for making progress. Monitoring the progress of implementation and reporting. Currently in the making is a dashboard that will help everybody to monitor the progress. So that's a dashboard available on a website where we will outline the progress of implementing the 22 policy actions. We will also implement the indicator framework. Also on that, in the communication and in the staff working document, there are further indications how that will look like. And lastly, in 2029, we plan to have a conference to take stock of progress made and invite then the further input for how to continue with the roadmap and phasing animal testing. And with that, I'm at the end of my presentation. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Geo, for giving this overview over the Commission's roadmap. And so great that we have your presentation, because now we will then turn to the two other speakers from the civil society and the animal welfare, animal protection community. We have Luísa Ferreira Bastos, sorry for the pronunciation, Senior Animals in Science Program Leader at the Eurogroup for Animals. You are a trained biomedical engineer, and today you lead the Eurogroup for Animals work on advancing the transition to non-animal science at the EU level. We also have Antigoni Effraimidou, Antigoni is with us online. She's a senior strategist in institutional policy for research and toxicology at Humane Worlds for Animals. She's a lawyer specializing in EU public policy, and she leads Humane World for Animals Europe's work program on chemicals and product safety legislation. And you have 15 minutes altogether, so that means 7.5 minutes per person. So Luísa, maybe you will start by giving the Eurogroup for Animals perspective on the Commission's proposal. What is good? What can be improved? How can we make sure that we go from ambition to action? You have the floor.
Thank you, Niels, for that introduction, and good morning, everyone. It's a pleasure to be here with you today. With this short presentation, I hope to bring some clarity on the sustained efforts that will be still required to implement the roadmap and ensure it actually delivers on ending animal testing in the EU. But first, some context on how we got here. When, as a coalition of animal protection NGOs, we decided to launch a second ECI to phase out animal testing, sorry, we did it because the positions and initiatives proposed by decision makers at the time were moving in a worrisome direction. Your throat always fails when you have to speak. So at that point, animal testing risked increasing instead of decreasing, despite the EU's stated commitment to ending animal use in science. And you're familiar with the harms of animal testing. Phasing it out responsibly will end the suffering of millions of animals, can improve human and environmental protection from toxic chemicals, and create jobs that do not inflict moral injury on workers. So the ECI Safe Cruelty-Free Cosmetics didn't emerge in isolation. It reflected these benefits and the broader momentum. Niels already mentioned the resolution of the Parliament that was launched shortly after the ECI, asking the Commission to accelerate the transition to animal-free innovation. And in parallel, we saw support emerging from scientists, citizens, and industry with a clear message. The EU could and should do more. So in response, the Commission committed to two key deliverables: this roadmap that we are discussing today and a European research area policy action on accelerating new approach methodologies that is also now being implemented. And from the Commission's July 2023 response to the June 2026 roadmap publication, we've witnessed workshops, conferences, roundtables, consultations, publications, all bringing together the voices of stakeholders to shape this initiative. And the roadmap advances change through key elements, some that Georg already introduced. It establishes an inclusive governance with stakeholder representation, which is essential for driving coordinated and targeted action. It unifies strategy across fragmented legislative and governance structures in chemicals regulation. It expands collaboration to build innovation and regulatory trust in new testing methods. And it includes 22 actions and more than 30 recommendations to eliminate some animal tests and address funding and regulatory gaps. However, many actions still lack clear ownership, which leaves accountability undefined. Who is responsible for delivering these actions? In addition, the roadmap faces some structural barriers that will require sustained political commitment. It depends on the Commission's commitment and work to secure adequate funding for implementation, and so success still requires sustained effort to mobilize sufficient investment across technology development, infrastructure, training, and regulatory reform. It acknowledges that legislative revisions of the chemical safety framework are necessary, but it doesn't yet specify which ones. So once they are identified by the governance structures, the Commission will be responsible for initiating these reforms. Yet the roadmap lacks a regulatory mandate to enforce them. And as history has shown, legislative action can drive rapid NAM development and uptake, as we saw with the cosmetic animal testing ban. So without this legislative backing, we still risk significant delaying on roadmap progress. So in order to ensure the transition pathway remains on track, The governance bodies must regularly establish and refine action plans with defined targets, timelines, and importantly, accountability. And the forthcoming dashboard that was already mentioned will enable the monitoring of the implementation progress and track the declining animal use over time. And here, civil society and this parliament are essential for maintaining democratic oversight. So in conclusion, these roadmaps provides a framework to accelerate a shift to animal-free testing for chemical safety, but its success still depends on sustained political will and also the continuous involvement of all stakeholders. Thank you.
Thank you, Luísa. That sounds like we have some work in front of us, all of us. Thank you for that. And then now we will move to Antigoni from Humane World for Animals. So Antigoni, if you want to take the floor, please, to give your perspective.
Yes, perfect. Thank you, Niels. I hope you can hear me all well. So today I will be presenting the expectations on the implementation of the roadmap, but also the support we will be needing to ensure that the implementation is at the correct track to our goal, so phasing out animal testing. So why the roadmap matters? We see significant potential for transformative and positive changes in the chemical safety assessment. The roadmap sets objectives and actions to facilitate the uptake of non-animal approaches and also help to adopt innovative solutions which can lead us to a new regulatory framework, one that maintains a high level of protection for human health and the environment. It also promotes international alignment and will actively potentially provide funding opportunities for a future regulatory animal-free science. And there are several benefits of non-animal approaches. I will be just mentioning few. But firstly, following the ECI, we do have a responsibility towards the citizens to reduce and replace animal testing. We can have more biologically and human relevant science and therefore can be more confident for our protection. These technologies also have greater efficiency, they are faster and potentially can have lower costs. Finally, they can also act as a catalyst for boosting the EU competitiveness. Next slide, please. Now, keeping the roadmap implementation high on the political agenda. So this is where I would like to focus today, and this is where we will need the support from the members of the European Parliament. So the scientific and regulatory transition will take time, and it will require continued political commitment. So the Parliament does have an important role to play in helping to sustain that commitment and also to creating opportunities for regular dialogue on progress, the challenges that we'll be facing, and next steps. So this continued engagement will help to ensure that the ambitions set in the roadmap are translated also into the practical actions. We see this as a collaborative effort where the Parliament, the Commission, ECHA, member states, and stakeholders can all contribute to making this transition as a success. Next slide, please. Yes. So we need to mainstream non-animal approaches used across ongoing and the upcoming EU legislation. So the roadmap already provides an opportunity to look beyond the chemicals legislation. If we want non-animal approaches to become the norm, they need to be embedded across the EU's wider policy agenda. So we have the European Biotech Act, which is an opportunity to recognize non-animal approaches as key enabling technologies for innovation and also helping strengthen EU leadership in biotechnology and modern regulatory science. We also have now the Horizon Europe 2028-2034 program, which will be equally important to provide the sustained funding needed for the development, the validation, and also the regulatory uptake of these methods. And we should not forget the REACH revision. So it might not be happening now, but it is much needed revision to modernize the chemicals regulation and also align with the objectives of the roadmap. Yes, the ultimate objective of the roadmap is phasing out animal testing and moving towards a modern regulatory framework which can support the non-animal and human relevant science. So reaching that vision will take time, will require a gradual stepwise transition. So the first opportunity we see here is to begin this transition is the revision of the REACH annexes. We know that this will be coming soon. And as the Commissioner Roswald recently mentioned, the roadmap will need to be incorporated into the regulatory framework. So the REACH annexes update is an important first step for that journey. Now, in March 2026, several members of the European Parliament sent a letter to the Commission saying that we cannot wait for the REACH revision and we need to move ahead with the update of the REACH annexes. And this is to ensure that we advance the regulatory framework together with the scientific advancement. So I will not go through all these points of the letter, but it is important to note that the letter also acknowledges that the revision of the annexes will be essential for delivering the objectives of the roadmap. Now, when talking about REACH annexes, these include the information requirement for the companies to conduct several tests to prove that the product is safe. And those, unfortunately, by default, include mainly animal testing. So that's why we think that we need several changes to ensure that the REACH annexes follow the scientific development and also enable the use of non-animal approaches. So I will not mention all the changes we expect, but we do need to make sure that the Annex 11, which is adaptation to information requirements, will be able to make it more stronger and implementable. And also we will need guidance documents and tools to guide the companies consider all the available methods before reaching to an animal testing. So indeed, the revision of the REACH annexes, we see it as a first test for implementation, which will be first real opportunity to evaluate how the roadmap works in practice. So by monitoring implementation, assessing outcomes, and capturing lessons learned, we can build a stronger foundation for future regulatory and legislative developments. Next slide, please. Now, on the expectations for successful implementation. So the successful implementation of the roadmap will depend on monitoring the progress and we'll be able to adopt to the new findings. That is why for us, the periodic reporting of its progress and implementation is crucial. You can click yes. Oh. We need also collaboration between the regulators and registrants, building confidence in the new approaches. We will need to secure adequate resources, so investing in skills and expertise through the Horizon Europe program and also the European Parliament pilot projects and other schemes. We also need to ensure that agencies have the capacity to support this scientific transition. And we need to ensure that we have a coordination across the governance structure. So we are talking about alignment of the roadmap governments, as Georg already presented, but also with the other relevant structures and groups, such as the OSO subgroup. Finally, we should not forget to look at the long-term objective that we have, and also establish a stepwise shift towards a modern non-animal regulatory assessment framework. Now, to conclude, the roadmap provides a unique opportunity to modernize the chemical safety assessment across EU, and its success will depend on the collaboration, the adequate resources, and also the continuous monitoring. The revision of the REACH annexes is the first important step for us, and with the support of the European Parliament, we can help ensure that the roadmap's objectives are progressively reflected across the future EU legislation. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Antigoni, for your contribution here. And now we have 15 minutes. So if there are members that would like to comment or have questions, and Anya has already raised her hand. So Anya, if you want to contribute here, you're most welcome.
Yes, thank you, Niels. I just noticed that I have made quite a mess of my notes here. So I hope that everything will be clear. Well, the fight against animal experimentation is, of course, very close to my heart. And I worked on this topic before and also during every one of my mandates here at the Parliament. And just as we speak, millions of animals are going through hell, stuck in laboratories, being injected, opened up, tested with all sorts of toxic substances. So I'm happy to finally see this institutional progress with regards to the phase out of animal testing in Europe. And I would like to thank the Commission for attending our meeting as well, as all the and for all the other speakers, of course, too. Well, we heard some positive and also some negative points regarding this roadmap. And as a rapporteur on the Biotech Act in MV and Sant, I already tabled many amendments on this topic as well. So more precisely, I call for EFSA, for instance, to set up a panel on new approach methodologies, to expand this mandate to be responsible for providing advice or explanatory dialogue on the regulatory applicability for alternative approaches, and well, many more. But anyway, so many of these negative aspects on the roadmap are already addressed in amendments over there. Furthermore, we need to make sure that institutional capacity and legislation make the match the pace and the needs to the scientific community, which has for years already been calling for more efficient, modernized and animal-free science and regulatory procedures. So I look very much forward to the support of other political groups for these amendments on new approach methodology are already tabled, and to closely follow the Commission's implementation on the roadmap. And I was asked to tell something about the timeline here. So the file timelines, the deadline for amendments is already closed. And the plenary vote is expected in December. And especially to this roadmap, the coordinators in the ENVI committee decided to invite the Commission and ECHA to present the roadmap on one of the upcoming meetings after the summer. So probably it will be in September. So that's all from me. Thank you.
Thank you, Anya. And yes, I heard about that that the coordinators have invited ECHA and the Commission in the Envy Committee to have a discussion. That's very positive, I think, that you will continue this discussion here. Jessica, please, you want to come in?
Yes, thank you very much. Thank you very much for these contributions. I think it's a very important step. I have, though, 2 points that I would like to ask or mention to the Commission. First of all, I believe that most likely we can, if we really do our best, get rid of 90% of animal testing. We will have to face the reality that 10% is probably not being able to phased out. And I wanted to ask the Commission if they were aware that the FEM committee recently adopted a report on health, where actually they called for a more gender-balanced approach to animal testing, which sounds a bit weird when you just hear it, because we need more female representation in animal testing. But in essence, they are right, because most of the testing is now taking into consideration the male as a basic. And that doesn't take into consideration the hormonal fluctuations that females deal with and the effects that chemicals, hormones, whatever substances can have. So when we move away from animal testing, my question to the Commission is, how do you take into consideration the specifics of certain type of products and the differences there may be in the response between men and women? Because in a model, you can model it, but when you start to use nanotechnologies, this is a difficult one. And I don't have the answer, it's a question, but I think it's a very important one not to overlook, because otherwise we end up in the same situation where we are today, that actually medicines and health products are being developed while being tested on men. And actually, we do not really know half of the time how they act in women. So that is one important one to take into consideration. And then I think there's one space overlooked by the Commission when it comes to, pardon, I have the same thing. My throat starts to fail when I need to talk. When it comes to phasing out animal testing, because EFSA requires all companies that do anything in the agri-feed business, let's take feed additives as an example, to deliver sufficient proof, animal tests, animal trials, to register their products. So I think the Commission should look into helping these companies to phase out animal trials. And these are animal trials which are not animals kept in laboratories. These are just on-farm tests of new substances. But first of all, they're very expensive for the companies. They are unnecessary if we can replace a large part with models, AI, or whatever technologies we can use. So I think the Commission should look into facilitating this aspect of phasing out animal testing as well, which today is overlooked. EFSA even asks for additional animal trials, while companies already have done their trial work, their tests, they have proven that it works. But then EFSA says, well, if you want to register, you have to do again animal trials. So there's two things here. First of all, facilitate companies to phase out their animal trials, or at least reduce it significantly. Secondly, why are we doing it twice? So those are my points. Thank you.
Relevant questions, and we'll hand the floor back to the Commission and to the organizations. I could just perhaps throw in a question just on the numbers you mentioned, Jessica. Maybe you said maybe 90% could be avoided, but 10% would need to be done. And maybe the Commission and the animal welfare organizations could give their perspectives on what is the ambition level from your point of view. I don't know if you could set percentages on, how many of the animal tests could be avoided actually if we use non-animal methods, according to you. But also very relevant questions from Anya and Jessica. So please, Geo, you're still with us, I hope, from the European Commission. Perhaps you could take the floor and give your perspective. And we have just, I think, 7 minutes altogether, so not the longest time.
Yeah, many thanks for the questions. I can try to briefly answer them. Let's start with the 90% figure. I don't know what the basis for that estimation is, so difficult to say something more in detail. But the roadmap is clearly identifying animal testing, which can be replaced in the short, medium, and long term. And short term means we are already ready now to do that. Medium term means we still need to further develop method or have other preparatory steps to do, and long term means that for the more complex endpoints we need to find new regulatory framework, regulatory scientific framework, how to use the information from non-animal approaches to assess whether chemicals are safe. And I think it is this latter, this long-term ambition, where I then would rather challenge the 90%. I believe, or I assume, but I don't know what the basis is, but I assume that the 90% figure is coming from one-to-one replacements of animal testing. That the idea there is that with non-animal approaches, we get the same information as from animal testing, which is not the case in many instances. So we know that in the long term, we need to build new regulatory scientific frameworks for the assessment of chemicals based from the onset on the information we receive from the animal approaches. And with that, we assume that in the end, we can phase out animal testing completely. That is the ambition of the roadmap. On the question on the agri-feed trials of animals, the animal testing in that area, I'm not really familiar with that area, but also here, if we have the required methods to replace animal testing for chemical safety assessments, then I see a high probability that we can also replace animal testing in other areas, and likely also in the agri-feed area. Okay, I hope I have not forgotten any of the questions. Thanks.
I just had one more question that was not addressed, which is how, if we replace animal testing, how do we take into consideration the different responses of men and women to certain?
Right, that is indeed a quite interesting point. I think already now for chemical safety assessments, the differences between the different genders on and what the results of in general testing on chemicals is telling us is a quite important topic. To say how one can distinguish between how chemicals act in men or women with non-animal approaches, I think that deserves a quite scientific answer. In the end, I believe it is doable. For instance, many of the in vitro system, the cell-based system, could likely help here by including specific receptor systems which are more specific for some of the gender, as well as measuring at the same time, for instance, in some of the systems, the hormone level, if that is relevant in that system. So I believe it is possible to do that, and we can also employ modeling with that. We can employ further methods based on computational tools. So in the end, I believe that the non-animal approaches offer great potential to really distinguish then how the different genders respond to chemicals. Thanks.
Thank you, Geo. And now, Luísa, we have a short time, but if you want to come in.
Very shortly, always. Thank you also for your questions. I like to start by, I think we can all acknowledge the amazing collaborative work of the several DGs, also led by ENV and GROW for the delivery of this important roadmap. One important element that I don't know if it became clear from the comments I heard is that it really pulls together several initiatives as the Life Sciences Strategy, the Biotech Act, or Horizon Europe, just to mention a few, where it aims to take advantage of all the opportunities that these initiatives can provide to advance non-animal testing and align them with the goal of the roadmap. So it's important that we continue this work on these files also in this in the work that the Parliament does. Now, the goal of the roadmap is to end animal tests, and I think Georg already covered that well. In NAMs and gender question that was posed, it's I would like to convey that new approach methodologies bring opportunities that animal testing never did and cannot. It can combine complex in vitro and computer models in order to take account wider populations, not only men and women, but really wide populations that cannot be tackled with only animal tests or only in vitro tests, was really taking advantage of the battery of technologies that we have.
Thank you. Antigoni, a very short comment from you, if you want.
Yes, thank you, Niels. I actually wanted also to comment on the gender, because I understood that for the 10%, which is not possible now to replace with non-animal testing, we are still looking on the gender and trying to get more animal testing in order to reflect the male and the female perspective. But the non-animal approaches already provide this distinguish. So we, as already mentioned by Georg and Luísa, we do have the in vitro test, which we're talking about living cells or tissues taken from human. So we can, by default, already looking in the two different genders. And also the computational models, we're taking data already that are human relevant. So NAMs, they do cover this very nicely. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you to all the speakers and to all who attended. I think the main conclusion here is that this roadmap represents a great opportunity for us, but it also requires that we work together to implement. There's a lot of work ahead of us. That's one of your main conclusions, I think. So the Parliament needs to keep the political momentum and work to make ambition actually also matter in action. Thank you very much. And next time we will be meeting the Tuesday, the 15th of September. Exceptionally, it will be on Tuesday in the September session. And we will have an exchange with Commissioner for Agriculture, Christoph Hansen. We moved it to Tuesday because we also take into account the Commissioner's busy agenda. And he'll present the new EU livestock strategy, and we'll have the chance to discuss with him. So I hope to see many people at that time. Until then, have a great summer, and see you on the other side.